Hi everyone, Martha Hayes speaking. I am here today with my colleague Laura Palczynski, and we are going to do something slightly different today with our podcast because we are going to interview each other. Normally, Laura and I would be busy interviewing different members of the EURAKNOS Consortium for our collection of podcasts, but today we're actually going to chat with each other about the podcasts and videos we've been creating for the EURAKNOS project. Both Laura and I create the content and edit the content for the podcasts and videos. So we thought, what better way to chat about it than to chat to each other? So how do you suppose we kick this off then, Laura?
I guess we start with kind of what we need to produce for the EURAKNOS project as part of the project brief. So that was 5 videos and 50 podcasts. 50
podcasts. It's a lot of podcasts. We're currently over halfway through our podcast, which, as our listeners will know, can be found on the Spotify channel. So I thought I would tell our listeners why I've gone for Spotify to host our podcast. And that is because it's currently one of the biggest streaming services globally. And when we actually chatted with the rest of the EURAKNOS Consortium, we realised it was something that most people are on. And we wanted it to be a system where you could be listening to music and then you could just transfer across and listen to one of our EURAKNOS podcasts. So that's why we decided to go to Spotify for hosting our podcast. And our videos can be found on both the website and on the EURAKNOS YouTube channel. So I suppose we ought to discuss how we decide what content we go for our EURAKNOS podcast.
Yeah. So that's kind of my area, isn't it? As part of our dissemination plan for EURAKNOS, I have looked through all of our different consortium members and thought about what roles they've had in the project, in terms of what work they could talk about, but also because we've got the communication element, what links we've got with our thematic network. So we've got a few different projects that we've featured. So, Affinet, 4D4F, to name just a few. So looking at who we can talk to get some interesting content. Then pinning the people down to record the podcast is quite often the challenging part, isn't it, Martha?
Yeah, that is the tricky part. And we would love to be able to give you lots of tips and hints for overcoming this one, but we're still working that out currently.
Lots of reminders, direct emails or messages, or sometimes even a phone call, just to...
Exactly. But what we do find is when we finally pin down people to chat to us on the EURAKNOS podcast, they always thoroughly enjoy it, and we always manage to produce a very good podcast. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. So we'd recommend to others who are listening, who are potentially trying to produce podcasts for a thematic network, to keep persisting, because actually it can be a really enjoyable experience recording the podcast. So in terms of videos, how do we decide on our content for our videos, Laura? Can you give a bit of an overview on that?
Again, it sort of is looking at, so the videos are really trying to convey the work being done by EURAKNOS. Again, similar to the podcasts. So it's taking advantage of where we are. So we've got a couple of videos from when Martha and I were at the Budapest workshop right at the start of the project. So we could feature what different actors who were present at that workshop thought that the EURAKNOS project could provide them, what benefits they thought that EURAKNOS could provide. And it's really nice to look back at that and see that we are delivering on those. And then the other one that we were doing was just presenting what the workshop aimed to do and a little bit of an introduction about what EURAKNOS aims to do as well. So those were our first 2 videos. And then our remaining 3 videos, we actually decided would be really good animated videos, because that was the easiest way to communicate about or disseminate about the content that we're producing in EURAKNOS.
It's sometimes easier to actually portray the message through animations, don't we? There's only so much you can do with interviews, and actually sometimes you have to think, to get this communicated and disseminated efficiently and effectively, we need to use animations and deliver the message in a slightly different way. So that's why we went for those animated videos, isn't it, Laura?
Yeah, there's some slightly abstract concepts in EURAKNOS. So really being able to make use of metaphors, like we quite like the growing of plants to show the blossoming of ideas, and different ways of depicting networks and things. So we get to be quite creative in how our visuals match our script for the voiceover for those animated videos, which is quite fun.
Yeah, that is one of our favourite jobs, definitely. And I suppose we ought to talk about what we're hoping to achieve with this method of communication. Why are we doing 50 podcasts and why are we doing 5 videos?
I think they're a little bit less intimidating, first of all, than several pages of report. We're all very busy people who are short on time, and particularly podcasts are something you can stick on whilst you're doing something else and listen to and hear it, and pull out anything that's particularly interesting or relevant to you. With videos, again, similar to, as you were saying about Spotify, YouTube is a really great channel to hold on to those videos and share those through. And it's just a bit more engaging as well than reading text, I think. Being able to see a video and, as I said, pairing the visuals with what's being said in a voiceover can be really quite powerful and might even get the message across slightly better than trying to convey in words. Also with videos, there's the translation option of YouTube has quite good automated translations, and you can manually edit those as well. So you can get some good subtitles on there, which again can be quite labor intensive for if you were try to do that to a full report, for example.
Yeah. I don't know if you'd agree with me, Laura, but for me, a really nice aspect to take away from creating the podcast is how effective a team approach can be. So Laura and I are responsible for creating these 50 podcasts, and although we decide the content and we edit the podcast, we've been able to share this with the whole project, and we've been able to say to our partners who has context with this thematic network or who has some really good inside knowledge on this topic. And that has meant that the interviewee has always had a good interest and a real flair for the topic that's being discussed, because we've been able to share this responsibility out through our project. So nearly every partner of the EURAKNOS project has created a podcast, which is a really nice, inclusive approach.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also you can get quite creative with the format of it. For example, when we were forced to do our latest project meeting online, I was able to say, right, we're going to pause my presentation for 10 minutes. We're going to record a podcast. So you might have already listened to that one as well. And so get creative. It doesn't just have to be a one-on-one interview. You can think about other formats as well, similar to what we're doing at the moment, of having more of a informal chat or an interviewee kind of format. It can be really variable and interesting.
And I think another point that probably is worth covering here is how easy it is to create a podcast. I mean, a lot of partners may think that you need a lot of technical equipment, but you really don't. And what we've learned during this COVID-19 pandemic is how you can adapt the tools you have currently to create these podcasts. So Laura and I are currently hundreds of miles apart, but we're sat having this conversation on Teams, and we have simply pressed the record button. Prior to this pandemic, Laura and I were going out and meeting people face to face and using our iPhones to record the podcast. But actually, even in a post-COVID world, we potentially would save on the miles and continue using this approach. And it really is very straightforward, and anybody can record the podcast this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the other point we should probably mention is recording content and popping it on Spotify and YouTube, and also our website as well. But then how do we try and draw people in to come and view those or listen to those, rather than relying on them organically stumbling upon it?
Yeah, I agree. The communication is a hugely important aspect, and again, it sort of links back to what we're talking about with utilizing your partners. If you record a podcast about a thematic network, you can then utilize all the context that thematic network has to share the podcast through their umbrella. So it's a nice ripple effect of communicating the EURAKNOS project through the podcast, which then means it's communicated out from other thematic networks too. So that's been really effective.
Yeah, lots of using of appropriate hashtags and tagging of projects and relevant.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In terms of social media, those links you've made with other thematic networks, tag them in that post and encourage them to share it. And yes, as Laura says, lots of appropriate hashtags. And the same applies for videos, even if perhaps the thematic network has had nothing to do with the creation of that video. They may still find it interesting to share with their following. So there's no harm in tagging them in it. And if they decide not to share it, then it doesn't matter. But 9 times out of 10, if you tag them in it, they will then share that video out for you.
Yeah, that's a nice way to make use of our thematic network community, I think.
I think so too. So do you think we've got it all covered there, Laura?
I think so.
And at this point, I suppose we can point out that if any of you had any questions or want any tips and guidance, then just get in touch through the EURAKNOS social medias.
The EURAKNOS project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme under Grant Agreement number 817863.
Royalty-free music from Ben Sound.